This presentation is about designing and conducting summative evaluations. I'm David Lewis, and in this presentation I discuss the last step in the Dick and Carey model. There is a whole field of educational evaluation. So summative evaluation means a lot of things to different people. If you had to define it, you could say summative evaluation is a research-driven model focused on the educational outcomes of an instructional product or program. In this presentation, we discuss the model proposed by the Dick and Carey model, but place it in context with another model. Just so we're clear, summative evaluation is the final step in the Dick and Carey model. As Dick and Carey describe it, this step is really outside of the instructional design process. In addition to the Dick and Carey summative evaluation approach, there are several other models. Dick and Carey's approach is best described as an objectives-based approach. This approach predates the Dick and Carey model and really goes back to the 1940s to some of the earliest evaluation studies. In this presentation, we thoroughly describe the Dick and Carey approach, but we also look at it relative to training evaluation approaches. According to Dick and Carey, there are two possible phases of summative evaluation. The expert judgment phase is only imperative if the instruction was developed externally. In some cases, off-the-shelf products can solve the needs of the organization. So rather than redesigning the wheel, make sure to check and see if there is an existing product that meets your needs. This should always be considered an option because exceptional products may already exist, and in some cases this can be very helpful, for it can limit production costs. As an example, consider the adoption of a new textbook. Educational institutions rarely develop textbooks from scratch. But textbooks are just one form of instruction. You can consider this process of evaluation for many types of instruction. So the question becomes, do these externally developed products suit the needs of the organization? Perhaps you're evaluating several products and are considering several of these as candidates, one over the other. To compare these, you can analyze these materials in several ways. There are four types of expert judgments that we can consider and that is considered in the Dick and Carey process. Finally, after each of these types of analysis are conducted, the evaluator may conduct yet another final field trial to collect information in order to determine if the instructional materials are effective for the target population. But first, let's consider these four types of expert judgments that were in the Dick and Carey textbook. One of the first types of analysis is a congruence analysis. This is a type of expert judgment in which the evaluator works with a subject matter expert to consider how well a set of materials fits the organization's needs. During a congruence analysis, the first thing an evaluator would need to do is consider their organization. So they need to develop a list of organization needs. What are their instructional goals, for instance? And what are the learner's entry skills? And how much can the organization pay for a new set of materials? In this case, you may not be a subject matter expert, but you certainly can consider it from an instructional design perspective. As an evaluator, you would want to compare the organization's needs with the characteristics of a candidate product. So how do the goals and objectives of that candidate product match up with your instructional goals? Also, you'll need to consider your learners and compare them to the intended target learners of the candidate materials. Finally, you'll need to consider the resources available for the project. Are those candidate materials too expensive? Once you've made your decisions, then you can make a recommendation to the decision makers in charge. So let's use an example to discuss an expert analysis. In this case, let's consider a university psychology department which is considering a prepackaged Blackboard course for Psychology 101. As it turns out, several publishers have been identified and they all develop course materials with online activities, narrative presentations, and exam questions. Now then, as an instructional designer, you've been tasked with working with their lead undergraduate professor, Dr. Thompson, and it's your job to help Dr. Thompson choose the best course materials for next semester. Perhaps you're not a psychology expert, but you can discuss it from an instructional design perspective. And as an evaluator, you'd want to look beyond the technical capabilities of this product, although there may be some considerations there to discuss in a minute. So you'll want to consider the characteristics of the candidate product, and there may be 3 or 4 to choose from various publishers. As an evaluator, you'll need to consider the learners and compare them to the intended learners of this course pack. There are several questions that you may have before you make a decision and help Dr. Thompson. So, for instance, are these materials designed for Psychology 101? Are the needs of the psychology department being met? How does each course pack map to the learner's entry skills? Is this course pack expecting a high level of performance to start, or are they really aiming too low? And is this course pack too costly? Can the psychology department afford it? How does the content in this course pack match up with their current syllabi, for instance? And is this completely in line with the needs of the department? Well, let's consider several other types of analysis relative to this example so we can answer some of these questions. Even though you may not be a psychology subject matter expert, you can work with one or more content experts like Dr. Thompson to consider this new instruction. But rather than showing them all the instructional materials, you can develop a framework that identifies the content covered. So perhaps there are lab skills that you need to consider. In another presentation, you were taught to diagram out instructional goals like this one with main steps and subordinate skills. Sound familiar? Now remember, we are considering externally developed off-the-shelf instruction, not that you're designing instruction for Dr. Thompson, but you can still use many of these same ideas. You can judge those materials by comparing them to your institutional goals. To do this, you need to clarify your institution's needs. So what are the lab skills? And once you have a list of needs or goals, you can do a goal analysis. So develop an evaluation framework based on the subordinate and entry-level skills for that goal. Something like this. Now, you and the expert can consider this externally developed instruction with your checklist and check off the required skills and knowledge necessary to fulfill the goals of the institution. Dr. Thompson may suggest additional skills or knowledge that may be missing from this analysis. That's his job as the content expert. So it's in this way that you and an expert can consider externally developed materials and see if they meet the institution's needs. Next, we have what is known as a design analysis. The purpose of a design analysis is to determine the adequacy of the learning components within the instructional materials. So in this case, you can consider the course pack to see if those materials actually have, say, pre-instructional activities. If not, maybe they can be amended or improved. So if a set of instructional materials has this list of components as shown here, you as the instructional designer could suggest that they be refined. So you could work with Dr. Thompson to develop a set of pre-instructional activities. Then once that was complete, you could also develop the follow-through activities to further support the chosen course pack. The purpose of this design analysis then is to consider the adequacy of these materials to determine if they actually have all of the learning components. Finally, let's consider the importance of a feasibility analysis. So you and Dr. Thompson have the perfect course pack, but have you considered the Blackboard server as a part of this equation? Now it's time to discuss it with information technology. Maybe it's the perfect course pack, but will it run in the current server environment? This is the purpose of the feasibility analysis. Perhaps the online marketing says it runs well on Blackboard, but the server administrator will still want to test it and make sure it runs fine given the current server system. What may sound simple, a software installation, is actually more complicated than you might think. So be prepared to analyze this product on all levels. Well now, that leads us to the next phase given Dick and Carey's summative evaluation model. Even if the instruction was developed in-house, or if your externally developed instruction was deemed useful given those 4 types of analysis, then a final step in the summative evaluation process is to consider a field trial to determine once and for all if the instruction meets the needs of the organization. This field trial may be different from the one discussed in the chapter on formative evaluation. Its purpose generally is to determine both the strengths and weaknesses of the material. This may be conducted in order to find areas for revision or to determine if the instructional materials should be maintained. The idea behind this evaluation is to provide information for decision makers. In either case, many of the evaluation techniques used during a formative evaluation field trial are also appropriate for the summative field trial. Well, that concludes the Dick and Carey model of summative evaluation. Let's turn our attention to yet another important model of summative evaluation. Before there was a Dick and Carey model, scholars were interested in the design of instruction. In the late 1950s, Donald Kirkpatrick developed a way to analyze training programs. As a part of his dissertation process, he developed 4 levels of training evaluation. The first of these is the assessment of the learner's initial reactions or attitudes towards the training materials. He also considers the learning that took place as a result of the training. In addition, the behavior of the learner after the instruction is considered as a way to assess the training itself. Finally, Kirkpatrick evaluates the results of the training on the organization itself. Let's consider each of these in more detail. Reaction is how the participants of a training event have initially reacted to the training. Typically, an evaluator will provide an anonymous questionnaire for the participant to fill out and give their opinions of the training experience. You've probably filled out a similar evaluation as a part of your coursework. These smile sheets, as they're generally called, are helpful to spot problems if they exist. But usually people are non-committal with these types of opinion surveys and are either very frustrated or very happy with the instruction that they've been provided with. So these training evaluations are of limited usefulness. And even Kirkpatrick describes this as only a level 1 evaluation. Kirkpatrick's next level, level 2, is learning. This level is concerned with the extent to which the learners gain knowledge, skills, or even attitudes as a result of a training event. Evaluators will generally develop tests to measure the differences in learning. Usually these tests take the form of an achievement test, but they can be more practical in nature and be something like a driving test. However, it's important to only consider the material covered during the training event. So use your objectives for the training to guide the development of this test. The next level, behavior, is about how the training participant performs in the workplace. This is sometimes referred to as transfer of training and is to evaluate the training itself based on the behavior of the participants, but now in the workplace. There are many ways to measure this change in behavior, but Kirkpatrick suggests that a survey of the participants' supervisors or peers is sufficient. Finally, we have level 4, the results. This is all about the results of the training on the organization. So, were there decreased costs as expected? Is there increased efficiency? Or is morale better? Of course, this result is based on the content of the training program itself. But some critics say it's very difficult to measure cause and effect in this way. So, for instance, if there is no change in efficiency of the organization, is that really due to the training? Or is it due to some other factor or group of factors? This is one common criticism of Kirkpatrick's 4 levels. But certainly it's possible to measure valid results if the study is designed with this in mind. Well, this brings us to the final slide in this presentation. This presentation discussed 2 models of summative evaluation. However, evaluation is a very broad field, and there are many other models of summative evaluation. I encourage you to consider other ways of thinking about evaluation and instructional design. Different perspectives provide you with a well-rounded view of instruction. However, do so with a skeptical eye. It's important that you base your methods of teaching on evidence-based practice. Question those who try to convince you that one way of teaching or learning is better than another, and look at the evidence that they provide and let this evidence convince you which is the best method. Well, sadly, this brings us to the conclusion of this set of presentations. Over this set of presentations, we considered the Dick and Carey instructional design model from start to finish. In the future, consider this model as you design instructional materials. This set of presentations was one way of looking at this model, but only consider it as a resource. There is much that has been written about instructional design and learning. I encourage you to read further, and may you put your readings to good use. With that, I bid you farewell. Thank you and goodbye.